What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Rustomod. We have finally wrapped up phase one of our budget boosted Buick car. Now, if you guys have missed the build series, I actually just put up a build in 10 minutes video where we can go over the entire build process. It's actually a really cool video to see where the car started to where it is now. But if you guys missed it, make sure you check that out. But I'll give you a quick rundown of what we've done to this car. So we actually snagged this thing from a junkyard for 200 bucks. The whole premise of this build was we tried to get a cheap car that we could do a twin turbo LS build on for as cheap as possible. And then we got a Silverado. We actually parted the whole truck out, and we've made some money off the part out to be able to put all the stuff onto the LS motor. We have a bunch of stuff in here to make it a cheap hot rod for as low cost as possible. And I really love this build. I love the concept of it. It was a lot of fun to do it, and we definitely want to do something along those lines again. So this video is going to be a complete cost breakdown of what we have into the Buick so far, so you guys can kind of see what it takes to build something like this. So at the very beginning, I said I could try to do this thing for under 5,000 bucks. So let's go through all the cost breakdown to see if we met our goal and try to build this thing for under 5,000 bucks. So I have all the costs written down on my phone, and I've been tracking it for a long time as we built this car. Now let me preface this by saying you guys don't have to do exactly what we did. I'm just trying to break the car down in the ways that I spent money. We did wheels and tires, we did stuff like that, which you guys might not have to do. We did the whole fuel system, where if you were to do an NALS, you probably don't need the fuel system that we have, but I wanted to upgrade it just in case we end up making this thing bigger and better in the future. So let's dive in and show you guys what it took to build this car. So since we're outside, we're gonna start with the exterior of the Buick. Now, the Buick was really ugly when we first got it. It was covered in primer, and it just didn't look very good. It didn't look good on video or on camera. So I actually went over the whole thing with lacquer thinner and a Scotch-Brite to get all the primer off. I kind of did a pretty halfway job. It looks better than it did, but it's still not the best. Now, it does have some big rust holes in it that we're gonna probably have to patch, because if we want to try to drag race this thing, they're not gonna let us run it on the track with all the holes in the car. So that is one thing that we're gonna have to do in the future in phase two of the Buick, where we try to make this thing a little bit better. But let's start with the exterior to show you guys what we did to make the stance right and to make it look really cool. So the first thing that you guys are gonna see are the wheels and tires. Now, I actually had a set of steelies from a S10 that I did a little bit ago, and I actually reused those wheels on this. Now, these wheels are 15-inch, they're just plain steel wheels, and we put some dog dish hubcaps on them and some used tires on there, and it makes it look pretty cool. I really like the steel wheel dog dish look. So the wheels, we actually ended up spending 200 bucks just to make the car look a little bit better. The other thing we did was we put some shocks in the back. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with these Nova platforms, we actually added a little bit wider tire in the back just to try to give it that stance, and we had to get different shocks. Now, I put some air shocks in the back just to get the thing to be able to raise it up and down, because it does rub a little bit, and the shocks were about 100 bucks. Now, to get the car as low as we did, you remember we actually heated up the front spring, so that was free, but the back, we actually put some lowering blocks in there. And the lowering blocks were about 50 bucks. I got them on Amazon. The only other exterior mod that we did was the hood pins, and that was actually really slick. I got those on Amazon, and those were about 40 bucks. So they're really cool. You just click them, the hood latches, it's really nice. It's low profile, so you don't really see them. We were trying to keep a sleeper look on this thing, and I think it came out really good. So in total, the exterior of the Buick was around 390 bucks. So let's move on to the interior to show you guys what we've done in there. So on the interior of the Buick, I tried to keep it pretty simple. If you guys remember, it had this really gross steering wheel whenever we first got it, and I just really couldn't even drive the car. It was really sticky and stuff. So I snagged this steering wheel on eBay. It was around 200 bucks. And the only other thing that I've really done on the inside was put this shifter in, which is not my favorite shifter in the world. It was the cheapest one I could find. I believe I got it on eBay, and the shifter was 80 bucks. The other thing that we did on the interior was just add those gauges in there. I had them laying around. The gauges worked pretty cool because they just went right in place of the air vent, and I stuck them in there. You can get them really cheap at an auto parts store for probably around 30 bucks. So everything on the interior with the steering wheel, the shifter, and the gauges was around $310 to make it look this good. I do think I want to try to upgrade some more stuff in the future, but you guys will have to stick around to show you guys what we want to do on the interior of the Buick. All right, now this is where it gets a little bit more expensive. So we wanted to upgrade the fuel system. If you guys know, if you're doing anything turbo LS, you're going to want a hefty fuel system to be able to keep up with the horsepower that you're going to make with that awesome setup. So I snagged this fuel cell and crudely put it in the trunk, but it works pretty good. We actually found this thing on eBay and it was 80 bucks. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. It's a pretty good size fuel cell and it'll work just fine for our application on the Buick. The other thing that we really needed that we had to tackle was the fuel lines. Now we wanted some bigger fuel lines, some PTFE AN lines, because we might run this thing on E85 in the future, and I wanted to have that already done so we didn't have to change the fuel lines out. Now we actually worked with Evo Energy on this project, and if you guys want to check them out, they're a really good budget source for fuel lines. I have a discount code linked below. But for the fuel lines, the whole setup was around 250 bucks. Now that was for PTFE lines. You can try to get rubber lines if you're not going to run E85 a little bit cheaper, but just keep in mind the fuel system is something that most people overlook, and it is a little bit expensive. Now to pump that fuel to the engine on the Buick, we actually used a leftover pump I had on the Rambler project, and that fuel pump was around 100 bucks. You can find those on eBay or Amazon. It's a Bosch 044 pump. I've used them a ton and they work really well for these LS swaps. That might be something that we have to upgrade in the future if we want to up the boost on this project, but for now it works really well. Now to deliver the fuel to the engine, we worked with Snake Eater Performance, and those guys are awesome. They helped us out a ton with the injectors. We just called them up, told them what we were going to do with this thing, and they sent us the injectors that we needed for this. Now the injectors are what you're not going to want to cheap out on. There's a bunch of budget options out there. We went with Snake Eater Performance because we know they're not going to fail. They're going to be awesome. But you can try to find some used ones online. But the injectors that we have in the Buick right now were around 700 bucks. So it is going to be a little bit more expensive to go that route, but it's definitely going to be worth it. It's something that you'll probably don't want to have to upgrade. You spend the money once and you don't have to worry about it. So check out Snake Eater Performance. Those guys are super awesome. Give them a call. They do this stuff all the time, and it's really awesome to work with great companies like that. So with the injectors, the fuel line, the fuel pump, and the fuel cell, we have a total of $1,130 that we have in our fuel system on this car. So let's go to the engine and show you guys all the expensive stuff that we had to do to make this thing as cool as it is. I wanted to jump in here to tell you guys about our new merch store. If you guys love the budget boosted Buick, make sure you go grab a sweatshirt, a t-shirt. We have a bunch of stuff on the budget boosted Buick and all the other builds we have here on Rustomod. So make sure you guys check the link in the description to go to our website. I have everything linked below so you guys can check that out and help support the channel. All right, back to the video. All right, now we have to do our engine setup. Now you guys remember we actually grabbed this motor out of a part out truck, and we actually got the truck for 600 bucks. So we have the price of the truck included into the whole price of the car, but we actually made some money on the part out, so we can use that money to be able to put into the project. So we actually made around $1,500 to be able to put into this project. So we're gonna add everything up and then subtract that price at the end to show you guys the total cost. So to be able to do an LS swap, the one thing that you're gonna need is some accessories. Now, we could have just went ahead and used the truck accessories, but the problem was truck accessories are really tall and we wouldn't be able to run the hood on the car. So we went to ICT Billet and we got their front accessory kit that would work with our hood clearance on the Buick. So the whole accessory kit we got on Amazon, and it was around 250 bucks for everything, which was a pretty good deal, I think, to be able to put this kind of motor in a different car. It worked out really well. So the one thing we did need to run these accessories was a Camaro power steering pump. Now the power steering pump we just got at an auto parts store, and we got this thing for around 100 bucks. So pretty simple. You can go to your auto parts store if you need to ever replace it, and it works out really well. The other thing that we had to do was this motor actually had a different engine in it. It wasn't a Chevy and it wasn't a Buick motor. It was actually an Oldsmobile motor. So the motor mounts we did have to source. We actually got these motor mounts for 40 bucks online. They worked out pretty well. They have some ICT billet adapter plate to be able to adapt to the old small block Chevy to the newer LS. That worked really good. So we have around 40 bucks in the motor mounts to be able to put the motor in the car. Now, moving on to our turbos. So Max Heating Rod sells these two turbos on their website. I'll link them down below. We have a discount code with them. And each turbo was around 500 bucks at the time that we built this car. I'll have to see if they've changed prices on the turbos, but they're probably going to be around 500 bucks a piece. So That's around $1,000 in the turbos alone. Now, the whole piping and kit and all that stuff that we had to do, all this intercooler piping and everything, was a kit also from Max Peating Rods, and that whole kit was around $400. I'm kind of including all that kind of stuff because it's kind of mismatched from a bunch of different parts, but a lot of the piping and the intercooler and all that stuff we got on various places, but we spent around $400 to make the whole turbo kit work. Now, if you guys remember, we actually put a different transmission than the Buick actually came with. This, like I said, came with a different motor. It wasn't a Chevy bell housing. I didn't even know that was the thing in this generation of Buick, but it is different. So we couldn't use the Turbo 350 that we actually had in there. So we ended up using a Turbo 400 that I got from a buddy, and that transmission was around $100. Now, you're probably not gonna be able to find a Turbo 400 that cheap. So if you guys are looking on Marketplace and stuff, it might be a little bit more expensive, but for me, it was around $100 to put the transmission in there. The other thing that I really like to use on the Buick was V-bands. Now, the whole exhaust is all held together with V-bands, and just getting those are kind of expensive. You don't have to go that route, but I'd highly recommend it. It's way easier to do an exhaust that way. All the V-bands added up were around $60. Now, speaking of the exhaust, I went on Amazon and I found a cheap 3-inch exhaust kit just to make it work, and it worked pretty well. It had some bends and it had some straight pipes that we ended up using for the exhaust. It was around $180 for the whole thing, added with the V-bands. It made our exhaust pretty good. I definitely want to redo the exhaust a little bit in the future, just because it's a little bit loud and it kind of sucks to drive because it is really loud. But I want to do those cutouts that we got and make it a little bit quieter, but then open a flap up and it makes it a little bit louder. So the whole exhaust was around $180 to do. So with the turbo kit, the one thing that we did use was this Amazon intercooler, and I got this thing on Amazon. It was cool because they both come in the sides and then it has a charge pipe coming from the center. It worked really well with our Buick bumper. We had to cut it down a little bit for it to fit, but the intercooler was around $300 to get that in there, and it works really well. I think it fits the car really good. You don't really see it, but it is really big. It has a lot of efficiency, and I think it'll work if we ever want to upgrade this thing in the future. We shouldn't have to worry about upgrading the intercooler. The other people we worked on with this project was Spelab. Spelab ended up sending us an oil pan for this thing because the truck oil pan was just too low. It was going to scrape the ground if we ever drove the car. So Spelab sells a low profile oil pan, and that you can get for around $250. So we actually have a discount code, so you might be able to save some money with them. But it worked really well. It's a really nice product. It came with an oil pickup tube and all the O-rings you need to hook it up to the oil pump. So it worked really nice. I'm really happy with it. I'm gonna run their oil pan a bunch of times in a bunch of future projects. So definitely check them out and grab your oil pan. Now, one thing we did do, since we're running twin turbos, is we need something for it to drain into. So on eBay or Amazon, I have it linked below in the previous video, but we have a timing cover with turbo drains inside the timing cover, and that was really cool. So both of our turbo drains drain right into the front of the motor, and I got that timing cover online for around $75. So it was pretty cheap, really nice upgrade to do. You don't have to drill into your oil pan or anything. It's right on the front of your motor and it works awesome. Now, the one thing I didn't want to cheap out on was the wastegates. So we got some VS Racing wastegates. They're a little bit higher tier than some cheap eBay or Amazon ones you can get. But like I said, I want to try to build this thing in case we want to do a little bit more with it in the future. So the wastegates we spent around $300 on, and I had to get 2 of them because it is twin turbo. So that price is a little bit high, and you could probably find a little bit cheaper option, but wastegates are really something you don't want to cheap out on. You want to have some nice set of wastegates because you want to control that boost and not blow your motor up. So get some nice wastegates, but we spent around $300 on the VS Racing ones. Now, the intake. So our intake is actually a leftover intake I had from the Rambler. We originally used a different intake on there, but it just didn't really work out for our application. So I'm gonna say you can find this intake on Facebook Marketplace or something for around $100. I got the other intake that we had on here from Marketplace for around $100. You can find them used, but you don't necessarily have to upgrade the intake. The truck intake would work just fine. The only problem we had with this car is the hood clearance. So the truck intake would be too tall for the hood to shut. So I went with this low profile intake, and it works good. It worked well on the Rambler, so I'm sure it'll work good on this car. But an intake, you're probably gonna spend around $100 to $200 trying to find one used. But if you're doing an LS swap where you don't have the hood clearance problem, the truck intake will work just fine. And actually it flows really good. the truck intakes flow really nice. You can find the Trailblazer SS intake, I think, is the best flowing truck intake. You can find those for around 100 to 200 bucks on Marketplace as well. But our intake was 100 bucks, I'm gonna say, and it works perfectly fine. One really cool thing that we did on this project was power steering. So like I said, we have our Camaro power steering pump, and we actually got a kit on Amazon, and it uses AN lines to work with the old style power steering box on the car. So that worked out really awesome, and I'm really happy that that worked out because I was kind of scared they were gonna blow apart, but it works really well. So it was a kit that adapted the power steering lines from the Camaro pump all the way to our Buick power steering box. And that kit was only 50 bucks. So definitely, if you're gonna do a swap like this, check out that kit. It was a really nice upgrade for the Buick. We can have power steering, and I have no leaks. It works really good, and the power steering is really responsive. Now, one thing that we did out of our Junkyard Silverado motor was we put a cam in it, and we had upgraded valve springs in there. And I was really nervous that it wasn't really gonna work out. It was really cheap. We got the entire cam and valve spring kit on eBay for 280 bucks. And the cam sounds really cool. It's actually a really heavy chop, and it sounds awesome. And the springs work really good as well. So I would recommend it, but we'll see how long this stuff lasts. That's why we built this car as cheap as we could, because if it breaks, you guys will know about it, and we'll have to try to figure out what we can do. But right now, the cam and valve springs are working well. 280 bucks. It's called a Sloppy Mechanics Junkyard Cam or something like that. So I'll link it down below, but it worked out really awesome in this build, and I think it sounds awesome too. The only thing left I have is the radiator. So the radiator I got on eBay, and it uses an electric fan that came with it. It's kind of small. It doesn't really flow that much. That might be one thing that we want to upgrade in the future. But the radiator was around 130 bucks. You can find these radiators pretty cheap. This one's for a Nova. It kind of is small for the motor. I might want to try to change it in the future, but for now it cools it fine. So we'll have to see. When it warms up and gets hotter, we'll see how it really handles it. But 130 bucks for the radiator and the electric fan. The only other thing left I have is the throttle cable. The throttle cable, again, is a cheap Amazon one. It's kind of a pain to be able to get it in there, but it worked out pretty well. And the throttle cable, I think you could get it for around 40 bucks on Amazon. But with everything said and done, in the motor alone, we have around $3,385 just to make the car have a twin turbo LS in it, and that's not even the wiring yet. So let's move to the wiring and show you guys what we have to do to actually make this thing run. So for our wiring harness, the one thing that makes this whole thing work, it was $80. So I was trying to find the cheapest one I could find on eBay to see if the thing even worked, and it works really well actually. There is some weird things with it. The fan isn't really kicking on without a switch, so some things that you're gonna probably have to try to add just because it's really cheap, but it worked out pretty well. So the wiring harness was $80, and we did have to get the PCM VATs deleted, and that was around 150 bucks to be able to get that VATs deleted. Now, without the VATs delete, we actually had to get the thing tuned as well. So we had our buddy Brian come down, and he tuned the car, and just to try to get the thing working with the fuel system we have and the cam that we have, trying to get the timing set and everything. For HP tuners, it's around 100 bucks. Now, I know a lot of you guys probably don't have a buddy with HP tuners that can tune your car for 100 bucks, but Brian's a buddy of mine, and a big shout out to him for helping me out with this build. But you can try to find some guys like PCM of North Carolina that actually did the VATs delete on this ECU, and they can remote tune it. And I'll have to check out their website. I'll link it down below so you can see prices on remote tuning to try to get your car dialed in a little bit better once you get it running. But they do have a hot rod startup tune in it, and it did fire, but we had to get Brian to tinker with it a little bit to try to get it to run right. But we finally got it running, and it runs pretty good. We're gonna have Brian come back, and he's gonna do a full tune on it to try to get the thing dialed in. So you're not gonna wanna miss that episode where we go through the entire tuning process of this car. But it does fire up, run, and drive currently, and it runs pretty good. Now, getting the thing running with the wiring aspect was a little bit of a challenge, and one thing I didn't account for was our 3-bar map sensor. I originally had a cheap one on Amazon, it just didn't really work out. So I went to a low dollar motorsports and grabbed a 3-bar map sensor from them, and that's what you see in our vacuum block right there, and it works really well. So Brian had to calibrate it to work with that map sensor. So that one you can get around 70 bucks from low dollar motorsports, but it worked out pretty good. So all those issues aside, everything ended up working, and the car runs and drives and stops, and it's awesome. Now we're gonna have to go through and retune the car, try to get it dialed in a little bit better. Now there is a lot more stuff that I want to do on the Buick to try to upgrade it a little bit more in the future, but for the budget, trying to do this as cheap as we could, we spent around 400 bucks just in the wiring harness on the car. So that is the total cost of the wiring on the Buick, and that's pretty much the total cost of the entire car. So let's add that stuff up and see how much we spent on this whole project. So adding all the costs up to the Buick with the motor, the transmission, the entire wiring harness, the fuel system, the exterior, the wheels and tires, the interior, the shifters, everything that we have in the Buick, we have spent $5,620 to make this car work. But you guys remember we parted out our Silverado and we made 1,500 bucks back. So if you subtract the $5,620 from the $1,500 that we made back off of the part out truck, we actually spent $4,120 on the Buick. So we did do it under 5,000 bucks. And there were some hiccups in there that we had to try to get different stuff. So that is with no sponsorships, all consumer price stuff. So if you guys want to replicate this exact car, you're going to be spending around $4,000 to be able to get it on the road. Now there is a bunch of stuff that I want to still do on the Buick in phase 2 where we don't necessarily have to constrain to a tight budget. But we did do it. We did spend less than $5,000 on this $200 junkyard car. It was awesome. It was a really fun project. Comment down below if you guys like to see projects like this. I have some ideas for another project that we're getting ready to do that is also a budget LS swap, but it's going to be a completely different aspect of this where we actually swap the entire chassis of a car onto another car for as cheap as we can do it. So make sure you guys get excited for all the future projects we have here on Rustomod. Thanks so much for watching and following along with all the Buick videos. I really had a good time making this car, and hopefully you guys will see this in the future where we get this thing dialed in and try to rip this thing down the road. But that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.